Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Delegations from Moscow and Kiev sit down for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine that few expect to make headway as the Russian ruble hits an all-time low in financial chaos caused by Western sanctions. Tens of thousands of Australians are ordered to flee their homes as torrential rain sent floodwaters to record levels, leaving residents stranded on the rooftops of their homes. The COVID-19 pandemic is not yet over, and the country has not yet reached the endemic state of the virus, according to a health official. First in our news, the West slammed Russian President Vladimir Putin for putting his nuclear forces on alert, with the U.S. saying it was because his invasion has been halted by fierce Ukrainian resistance. Take a look. Now, Ukraine demanded an immediate Russian ceasefire and troop withdrawal on Monday as its delegation arrived in Belarus for talks with Russian negotiators on the fifth day of the Kremlin's offensive. However, earlier, Ukraine held out no great hope after agreeing to talks with Russia and Belarus, the launch pad for attacks on Kiev. Ukraine said Sunday that it had agreed to send a delegation to meet Russian representatives on the border with Belarus. However, with his government reporting hundreds of civilian deaths and Russian troops besieging key cities, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was skeptical about the talks.
Скажу відверто, як завжди, я не дуже вірю в результат цієї зустрічі, але нехай спробують. Щоб потім у жодного громадянина України не було жодного сумніву, що я, як президент, не намагався зупинити війну, коли був нехай і маленький, але все ж таки.
We will not go to Homel, the city in Belarus that serves as a military base for Russia. We will meet on the border. And we go there to listen to what Russia wants to say. We will not surrender. We will not capitulate. We will not give up a single inch of our territory. This is not the goal of our fight.
Meanwhile, Ukraine claims it has inflicted 4,300 casualties and that Russia's offensive has slowed, with Washington saying Moscow has yet to grab control of the skies. However, the Russians are making headway in the south, with Kiev admitting that the Black Sea city of Berdyansk had fallen, with Kherson on the other side of Crimea also besieged. Moscow has now almost forged a corridor along the Black Sea linking Crimea with separatist-held Donetsk. Kiev says 352 civilians have been killed, including 14 children, since the invasion began last Thursday. Ukrainians got control of their capital, Kiev, where a curfew was enforced. Civilians joined the military force defending the city as more countries agree to ship more weapons to Ukraine. And for the very first time in history, the European Union said it will now pay for and deliver weapons to a country under attack. Ursula von der Leyen said the EU will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons to Ukraine. Take a look.
As the war in Ukraine rages on and Ukrainians fight bravely for their country, the European Union steps up once more its support for Ukraine and the sanctions against the aggressor that is Putin's Russia. For the first time ever, the European Union will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and other equipment to a country that is under attack. This is a watershed moment. First, we are shutting down the EU airspace for Russians. We're proposing a prohibition on all Russian-owned, Russian-registered and Russian-controlled aircraft. These aircraft will no more be able to land in, take off, or overfly the territory of the European Union. This will apply to any plane, owned, chartered, or otherwise controlled by a Russian legal or natural person. So let me be very clear. Our airspace will be closed to every Russian plane, and that includes the private jets of oligarchs too. In another unprecedented step, we will ban in the European Union the Kremlin's media machine. The state-owned Russia Today and Sputnik, as well as their subsidiaries, will no longer be able to spread their lies to justify Putin's war and to sow division in our union.
Meanwhile, the ruble collapsed against the dollar and the euro on the Moscow Stock Exchange on Monday as the West punished Moscow with new sanctions over the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine. The ruble fell sharply at the start of trading, reaching 100.96 to the dollar, compared to 83.5 on Wednesday, the day before the invasion of Ukraine, and 113.52 to the euro, compared to 93.5 before the assault. And that followed an announcement by the West that it would remove some Russian banks from the SWIFT bank messaging system and freeze central bank assets. In reaction to that, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his defense chiefs to put the country's nuclear deterrence forces on high alert and accused the West of taking unfriendly steps against his country.
Приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства. Вы видите, что западные страны предпринимают не только недружественные действия в отношении нашей страны в экономической сфере, я имею в виду нелегитимные санкции, о которых все хорошо знают. Высшие должностные лица ведущих стран НАТО допускают и агрессивные высказывания в адрес нашей страны.
The United States condemned Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear forces alert on Sunday and said his conventional ground forces were experiencing logistical problems in their invasion of Ukraine. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on ABC that, quote, "This is a pattern that we've seen from President Putin through the course of this conflict, which is manufacturing threats that don't exist in order to justify further aggression." A senior U.S. defense official speaking on grounds of anonymity also said that Putin's step came as Ukraine's forces, held by arms from the West, continued to stymie the advance of Russian troops, who this official said had run into fuel supply and other logistical problems. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said in the televised remarks that Ukraine is using civilians as a human shield for the nationalists as Russia's invasion of Ukraine goes into its fifth day. Again, let's listen in.
Руководство Украины и власти города, объявив комендантский час, уговаривают жителей столицы оставаться в своих домах. Это еще раз доказывает, что киевский режим использует жителей города в качестве живого щита для националистов, которые разместили артиллерийские подразделения и боевую технику в жилых кварталах столицы.
Now, Ukraine has reported 352 civilian deaths, including 14 children, since the invasion began. Russia has acknowledged that a number of its forces had been killed or injured. The United Nations has put the civilian toll at 64, while the EU said more than 7 million people could be displaced by the conflict. The UN Human Rights Chief says at least 102 civilians, including 7 children, have been killed in Ukraine since Russia invaded 5 days ago, warning that the true numbers could be far higher. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Council, Michelle Bachelet said her office had recorded 406 civilian casualties in Ukraine, including 102 deaths. Let's listen in.
The attack on Ukraine is putting at risk countless lives. Between Thursday morning and last night, our office has recorded 406 civilian casualties, including 102 killed, including 7 children, and 304 injured. Most of these civilians were killed by explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery and multi-launch rocket systems and airstrikes. The real figures are, I fear, considerably higher.
Meanwhile, here are some images released by the Ukrainian Emergency Service showing residential buildings caught on fire due to the alleged Russian shelling and the rubble of damaged facilities, including a kindergarten and a market, as the Moscow's invasion of Ukraine goes into its fifth day. Meanwhile, Singapore will impose sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, including blocking financial transactions and the export of items that can be used as weapons against Ukrainians, according to the government today. The Asian state joins others, including the US, EU, Britain, Canada, Japan, Australia, and Taiwan, in imposing economic sanctions against Russia as global leaders seek to ramp up pressure on the Kremlin. Singapore rarely imposes sanctions on other countries without a decision from the United Nations Security Council. Minister for Foreign Affairs Vivian Balakrishnan told Parliament. Now, Balakrishnan also cited Russia's blocking of a draft Security Council resolution deploring its aggression in Ukraine as a reason for this move. Singapore will impose export controls on items that can be used as weapons to harm Ukrainians, block certain Russian banks and financial transactions connected to Russia. Balakrishnan added that specific measures are being worked out and will be announced soon. Meanwhile, Japan will sanction Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko and limit trade with Russia's central bank over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. That, according to Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. He said, in light of Belarus's apparent involvement in this aggression, we will take sanctions against President Lukashenko and other individuals and organizations and export control measures. This was what Prime Minister Kishida said after holding talks with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. Kishida added that in order to enhance the viability of financial sanctions against Russia in the international community, he said, we have decided to impose sanctions to restrict transactions with the Central Bank of Russia. The moves come as Japan acts with a group of 7 partners to pressure Moscow over the invasion with a series of sanctions on Russian financial institutions and chip exports. Tokyo has also pledged $100 million in loans and another $100 million in emergency humanitarian aid. And Prime Minister Kishida said measures would also be taken to allow Ukrainians in the country to extend their stay if they have concerns about going home. Meanwhile, a defiant Russia said Monday it could ride out Western sanctions over its invasion of neighboring Ukraine as President Vladimir Putin huddled with officials to discuss the economic turmoil of the 5-day-old war. The Western sanctions on Russia are hard, but our country has the necessary potential to compensate the damage, that according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, telling this to reporters. He added that today, President Putin will be working on economic questions and meeting key ministers. He also said the economic reality has significantly changed, let's put it this way, adding that Russia had taken steps to prepare for it. Russia has been systematically preparing for quite a long time for possible sanctions, he said, including the heaviest sanctions that we are now facing. The severe financial punishment imposed by the West has sent the ruble into a tailspin, with the Russian currency down 20% against the dollar in midday trading. The Russian central bank more than doubled its main interest rate to 20% to try prop it up. Moscow Stock Exchange stock market remained closed for the day. Meanwhile, the sanctions targeting the Russian financial sector are intended to change the Kremlin's calculus. But on the ground, the roughly 100,000 Russian troops thought to be inside Ukraine continued their assault from the north, east, and south. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged the European Union to grant his country immediate membership as Russia's assault against the pro-Western country enters its 5th day. Let's listen in.
Ми звертаємось до Європейського Союзу щодо невідкладного приєднання України за новою спеціальною процедурою. Ми вдячні партнерам за те, що вони поряд з нами. Але наша мета бути разом з усіма європейцями. І головне – бути на рівних.
Meanwhile, more than 100,000 people attended a Ukraine solidarity march in Berlin, according to police, with many protesters dressed in the blue and yellow colors of the Ukrainian flag. Let's take a look.
War spreading further. This is not the only reason why I'm here today. I'm also standing with Ukrainian nation in support, but I'm also afraid that this will be just start of something bigger in Europe and in the world.
Organizers of the Berlin protest put the numbers at 5 times the police estimate, with demonstrators massing at the Brandenburg Gate, a stone's throw away from the imposing Russian embassy. Although the embassy in which Russian diplomats both work and live was cordoned off by police, some protesters gathered in front shouting "Glory to Ukraine" and singing Ukrainian songs. Meanwhile, in the U.S. Capitol, a few thousand people waved Ukrainian and American flags in front of the White House as they urged President Joe Biden to do more to halt President Putin's aggression. Americans nationwide came out to denounce Putin and express support for Ukraine from San Francisco to Detroit, Chicago, and Kansas City. Thousands also demonstrated in the Canadian city of Toronto. In Prague, tens of thousands gathered at the central Wenceslas Square, including Roman Novotny, who traveled around 300 kilometers from Ushchersky, Radisty in the country's southeast. A crowd of about 70,000, according to police estimates, chanted slogans denouncing Russia's attack on Ukraine. Many chanted, and banners also targeted Russian President Vladimir Putin. Speakers, including Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala, voiced support for Ukraine. In Russia's second city of St. Petersburg, around 400 people gathered in defiance of strict protest laws, holding protests, posters reading "No to War, Russians go home and peace to Ukraine." More than 2,000 people were detained in demonstrations across the country. Take a look.
Война в Украине – это не наша война. Это не наша война. Это война нашего высшего руководства, а не наша.
Войну начинать, это было очень плохое решение для самого народа, потому что очень многих там родственники, друзья, мужья, и они погибают буквально ни за что.
U.S. vacation rental platform Airbnb said Monday it would offer free short-term stays to up to 100,000 people fleeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The San Francisco-based company said in a statement that its top leaders had sent letters to leaders across Europe, starting with the leaders of Poland, Germany, Hungary, and Romania, offering support in welcoming refugees within their borders. It said the lodgings will be funded by the company, donors to an Airbnb fund for refugees and hosts. Airbnb.org is the company's nonprofit organization, which facilitates temporary stays for people in times of crisis around the world. And now, in an update, more than 500,000 refugees have now fled from Ukraine into neighboring countries. That, according to UN Refugee Chief Filippo Grandi in a tweet around midday Monday. The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, had previously said it is planning to deal with up to 4 million if the situation worsens. But the European Union's Crisis Management Commissioner says the figure could reach 7 million. Meanwhile, the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Philippines said the repatriated Filipinos from Ukraine will be given at least $200 as financial assistance, as well as social counseling in case they were traumatized by the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Currently, 13 Filipinos have crossed the Poland border. Take a look.
13 po yung mga nakatawid, 12 adults and 1 baby. They're now in Warsaw. Nasa isang hotel po sila doon, hinuhost po sila ng ating embahada. At they just took their RT-PCR tests, and kapag nag-negative po sila, makakalipad na po sila tonight or the latest tomorrow po. At sasalubungin po namin sila sa airport. Yung iba naman po nating mga kababayan, we're happy to announce na yung 6 na nakapasok na sa Moldova. Kasama po dyan isang medical student at 2 mga Pilipina na married to Ukrainians. Yung isa po, dala pa niya yung kanyang anak na baby rin po. No? Tapos yung iba po doon, nag-work naman sila sa mga international organizations. So, and then we have at least 10 people who are in Lviv now. We're still waiting for others for repatriation. We're still waiting for others to join them. Tapos itatawid na ulit na namin po sila sa border ng Poland. We made sure na before we already gave all the adults at least $200 financial assistance para meron naman silang pagsisimulan. Tapos syempre, kailangan din psychosocial counseling kasi hindi pa natin alam kung na-warshock ba sila o kung ano man yung pinagdaanan ng ating mga kababayan. We discovered that there are 33 people na nandun sila ngayon sa Lviv, pero ayaw nila talaga. Meron po rin pong maraming Pilipino na lumilikas sila papuntang Lviv pero hindi sila ayaw nila magpa-repatriate. They just want to wait it out and wait and see. So what we're trying to do is to be in constant contact with the Filipinos who choose to stay. Yung mga Pilipino po, yung iba kasi married to Ukrainian. So ayaw rin nilang mahiwalay sa kanilang mga pamilya. Yung iba naman po, mga household service workers na ayaw rin iwanan yung kanilang mga employers. Yung iba, mga teachers. Tapos may mga kababayan din tayo na feeling nila, gusto nila lang talagang i-wait out. Maghintay lang talaga matapos yung kaguluhan at ayaw mo nilang umuwi kasi they like their quality of life there, they like it in Ukraine, and they think na matatapos din to. So,
okay, just to repeat what she said there, because some of her audio were taken out. There are some Filipinos who do not wish to be repatriated, choosing instead to wait it out. The Philippine government will be reaching out to them and giving them necessary assistance and care packages. Meanwhile, should some refugees choose to flee to the Philippines, Ariola said the Philippines has always had an open door policy. Meanwhile, the Octa Research Group said the Philippines must keep up with the economic impact amid worldwide concerns, especially with the current conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Let's listen in.
We have to balance public health and the economy. Pero with the growing concerns worldwide, internationally, especially yung Ukraine-Russia war, we have to be able to keep up with economic impact. And this is the one way of keeping up with the economic impact. We have to take some risks then and reopen the economy.
And up next, flooding on Australia's east coast claimed another life overnight as a rain bomb continued to move south Sunday. And the DOH said the COVID-19 pandemic is not yet over and the country has not reached the endemic state of the virus. And New Zealanders stranded overseas by the pandemic returned home to tears and hugs as the country began dismantling some of the world's toughest COVID-related border restrictions. That and more when Eagle News International comes back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Days of downpours have pummeled Queensland and New South Wales, with authorities describing the wild weather as a rain bomb. We have more from Shailene Ryan Andrews Calaguas from our Australia Bureau.
Flooding on Australia's east coast has claimed another life overnight, bringing the death toll from the extreme weather to 6 as a rain bomb continued to move south Sunday.
Police in the state of Queensland said a 34-year-old man had died after his car became submerged in floodwaters around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday. While the man was able to free himself from his vehicle and tried to swim to safety, he failed to surface and his body was found a short time later. Huge downpours have battered eastern Australia for the better part of a week, unleashing decade-high floods, inundating homes and roads and sweeping away cars. Adrian Schreiner, Lord Mayor of Queensland's capital city in Brisbane, described the weather system as a rain bomb above southeast Queensland.
The main thing I want to tell residents of Brisbane is to avoid any unnecessary travel at the moment. It is still a dangerous and evolving situation with flooded roads, with a lot of dangerous potholes. Please keep in the loop. If you see anything, report it to the council call centre and our crews will get onto it. But thanks for your patience and understanding.
State Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk pleaded that people living in Brisbane stay home as the weather system moves south Sunday into major residential areas.
In relation to transport, all of our trains are not running in the southeast. The trams on the Gold Coast are, but our train system is down. My understanding is that most bus services are suspended and the Bruce Highway will open later on today. We have over 1,000 schools closed across the southeast, and once again, people are heeding the messages and are staying at home during this time. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of water around, and our emergency services need to get to people safely and quickly and respond appropriately. As you can see by this is a really big event, and the event is not over. With the Mary River, we saw those really high levels in Gympie. We had Mayor George Seymour on the phone. We now expect Maryborough to peak later on today, and they could be very high levels as well.
She said, with intense rain expected to continue into next week, more than 1,400 homes in Brisbane were at risk from the floodwaters. More than 250 people have been moved to evacuation centres, while thousands of homes were without power. Authorities issued 11 emergency alerts in the last 24 hours and responded to 1,800 distress calls. Queensland's Department of Education said more than 100 schools were to remain closed on Monday. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology has issued flood warnings for vast swathes of Queensland and in northern New South Wales, with more than 11.8 inches falling in some areas in the last 24 hours.
Reporting from Logan, Australia, Celine Calaguas, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Shailene. Meanwhile, a methane explosion at a coal mine in central Colombia claimed 10 lives, according to the National Mining Agency, and a search has been launched for 5 missing miners. This accident happened on Saturday afternoon at the Chapa mine operated by the Inge Colmac SAS company. The A&M agency said a group of 40 rescuers was searching for the missing miners and have installed a ventilation duct in the hopes of boosting breathability underground. Oil and coal, briquettes are Colombia's main exports. The Boyaca region, where the mine is located, has the worst track record for mining accidents in Colombia. That is according to the A&M. Last year, 130 people died in mining accidents countrywide, down from 171 the previous year. Most of the deaths occurred at illegal mines. The United Nations opened an environment summit in Nairobi, where nations are being urged to adopt the blueprint for a landmark global treaty to reduce plastic pollution. Take a look.
So, a huge responsibility sits on our shoulders at this resumed session of the 5th UN Environment Assembly, a responsibility to deliver solutions to the triple planetary crisis: the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste.
A number of competing proposals were merged into a single document ahead of the UN gathering, according to sources with close knowledge of the negotiations. Environment and civil society groups are pushing for a treaty that addresses pollution at all stages along the plastic life cycle, from its source as a raw material made from oil and gas to its sustainable use, recycling, and safe disposal. Less than 10% of the 460 million tons of plastic produced in 2019 was recycled, according to the OECD, with most ending up in landfill or the oceans. In other news, the Toronto District School Board is investigating reports of anti-Semitic incidents involving students this month. The details from Joshua Santillana. Josh.
2 anti-Semitic incidents have just happened this month at one Toronto middle school. Last week, 3 students surrounded a French teacher at Valley Park Middle School and gave her a Nazi or Hitler salute. This incident happened inside the teacher's grade 8 classroom. 2 students stood up on a filing cabinet and performed the Nazi salute, and a 3rd student shouted "Hail Hitler" from his desk. The said teacher is also a child of Holocaust survivors. Weeks ago, the Toronto District School Board, or TDSB, also confirmed that incidents of the anti-Semitic swastika graffitis were also discovered at the same school. Similar incidents have happened at Charles H. Best Middle School, with swastikas depicted in a classroom, and some students performing the Hitler salute in front of other students. Principal of Valley Park Middle School, George Bartzis, confirmed these anti-Semitic incidents through a letter sent to the students' parents Tuesday, expressing that these incidents are very upsetting and unacceptable, and not reflective of who they are and what they stand for as a school and as a community.
TDSB Director of Education Colleen Russell Rollins calls this incident highly offensive and shows us how much work still needs to be done to educate students and staff on anti-Semitism.
President and CEO of Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies, Michael Levitt, says that it is unfathomable and shocking that in 2022, a Jewish teacher is faced with Nazi salutes and a Hail Hitler chant in her classroom. Levitt also calls for an emergency intervention and to proactively send a strong message that Jew hatred will simply not be tolerated within our schools. Valley Park Middle School Principal Bartzis says that next month, students and staff will be listening and learning from Holocaust survivors themselves to further their Holocaust education and confront anti-Semitism in classrooms. Several government officials, such as Toronto Mayor John Tory, Minister of Education Stephen Lecce, Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca, and NDP leader Andrea Horwath, also calls for an urgent response from the TDSB and their solidarity with the Jewish community. TDSB Director Russell Rollins reports that 91% of the reported racism and hate incidents in schools are committed by students themselves, which calls for an urgent focus on educating students on the horrors and enduring pain brought by the Holocaust. Joshua Santillana, Eagle News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, New Zealanders stranded overseas by the pandemic returned home to tears and hugs as the country began dismantling some of the world's toughest COVID-related border restrictions. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the change was cause for celebration, particularly for the tens of thousands of New Zealanders overseas keen to return home. Until now, Kiwi expats entering the country needed to undergo 10 days of isolation in expensive and oversubscribed hotel accommodation. The requirement was dropped for New Zealanders arriving from Australia on Monday and will be extended to all repatriates on Friday. And here is more from the Prime Minister herself.
As a result of the advice that Professor Skegg has spoken to briefly this afternoon, I can announce today Cabinet has agreed that from 11:59 p.m. Wednesday the 2nd of March, vaccinated travellers entering New Zealand will no longer need to self-isolate. That means from this Wednesday, Kiwis and eligible travellers arriving from Australia will no longer need to self-isolate for 7 days. The second is that testing will remain critical. And so we will still require every traveller to undertake a rapid antigen test on the day they arrive and on day 5, 6. All positive rats must be registered and followed up with a PCR test. This is different to the advice for those currently in the community who test positive with a rapid antigen test, who don't need a PCR follow-up. And that's because our border will be the first place we'll see any new variants. And so we need to keep whole genome sequencing these results so we know what strains of the virus are entering the country.
At Auckland's airport, relatives carrying signs such as "Welcome home, my dearest daughter," scooped up loved ones allowed into the country without mandatory hotel quarantine for the first time in almost 2 years. Strict border controls were a key part of New Zealand's success containing the coronavirus, with only 56 deaths recorded in a population of 5 million. But the Omicron outbreak has surged in recent weeks, with 14,657 new cases reported Monday, and Prime Minister Ardern said the country's high vaccination rate of about 95% provides a strong blanket of protection. And the Philippines will lift most of COVID-19 restrictions in the capital. President Duterte's spokesman said after a sharp drop in infections and a rising number of people vaccinated. It comes weeks after the country reopened its borders to foreign tourists for the first time in 2 years, and as campaigning for the May 9 elections cranks up. Businesses, government agencies, and public transport will be allowed to operate at full capacity when the metropolis of 13 million people is placed on the lowest alert level 1 on March 1, according to Carlo Nograles, acting spokesperson of the government, which he previously described as the new normal. Masks will still have to be worn in public, but will no longer be required during sports or exercise under the new rules, which also apply to another 38 areas of the country. Temperature checks for entering establishments will not be necessary, and contact tracing efforts all but scrapped. Cases have averaged 1,000 in the past week, around 1,000 in the past week or more, compared with a peak of 39,000 on January 15, when the highly contagious Omicron ripped through the country. After lengthy lockdowns, which devastated the economy and threw millions out of work, the relaxation will help ease the financial misery for many Filipinos. The vaccination rate in Manila has reached 100%, a government official said recently, but the rate is much lower in other parts of the country. The virus has infected more than 3.6 million and killed more than 56,000, according to government data. And the COVID-19 pandemic is not yet over, and the country has not yet reached the endemic state of the virus. That, according to a health official today. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere made this comment a day after the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases placed Metro Manila and 38 other areas under the lowest alert level 1 status from March 1 to the 15th. Take a look.
Unang-una po, yun pong ating alert level system, kahit po tayo ay nag-de-escalate na to alert level 1, is still in effect. So ibig sabihin po, kung sakasakaling dadating tayo sa punto na tayo po ay magkakaroon uli ng pagtaas ng kaso, kapag nakita po natin na yung utilization po ng ating mga ospital ay napupuno, yan po ay magiging senyales po para sa atin na tayo po uli ay mag-elevate or mag-escalate sa higher alert level. Ang magiging kaibahan na lang po sa previous alert levels natin would be that ito pong ating tinitignan ngayon na pagpaplano for NAP5 sa transition plan natin, tinitignan natin na kung magtutuloy-tuloy po na milder form ang nagiging sakit dito po sa ating bansa at sa buong mundo, atin na pong isi-shift ang ating pagpo-focus from the numbers to the utilization ng ating mga facilities specifically for severe and critical cases. Hindi pa ho tapos ang pandemya. Hindi pa rin po tayo dumarating dun sa sinasabi nating endemic state. Na andito po ngayon tayo sa level ng ating sitwasyon kung saan we are transitioning dito po sa gusto nating marating na new normal. Ang endemic state din hindi nangangahulugan na ang virus ay naging mas mild o ang virus ay nawala. Ang ibig sabihin po ng endemic state, ang virus ay naandyan na, kasama na po natin dito sa ating buhay. Ngunit acceptable na po ang mga numero ng ating mga kaso, acceptable na rin po para sa ating society o para sa ating mga Pilipino na ito pong pagtaas ng kaso o kaya ay pagkakaroon po ng mga pagkakamatay dahil sa COVID-19 ay acceptable na po sa atin.
Oil prices and safe haven surged Monday while the ruble and European equities sank after world powers imposed fresh sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, fanning fears about a possible global energy crisis that could further stoke inflation. Now, equities rallied Friday and oil dipped as dealers assessed that the punishments imposed on Moscow were light enough to not hit its crucial oil exports. Russia is the world's third biggest producer at a time when supplies are thin and demand is surging. But the picture was changed at the weekend when the U.S. and European Union said they would exclude some Russian banks from the international bank payment system SWIFT and personally targeted Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Crude surged with WTI climbing towards the $100 mark, while Brent bounced back above that level after slipping on Friday. Other commodities rallied, with wheat, aluminum, and nickel also sharply higher. European stocks sharply lower, with London off more than 1%, while Frankfurt and Paris gave up about 2%. However, most Asian equity markets recovered from morning selling as traders focused on a planned meeting of Ukraine and Russian officials on the border with Belarus, hoping for an easing of the offensive. And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Challenges may often come our way, but sometimes it takes a good fall to know where we really stand. This has been Eagle News International. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times.